Okay. Okay, guys. What I'm going to do now is try to get you into the 20th century as quickly as I can. And we'll spend the rest of the course trying to understand the things that have happened in the 20th century. Okay, so we're going to start by explaining the events that took us to the First World War. Your book has a little bit of it, but not much. And so I'm going to explain what I can. Use the book as much as you can. Be careful with the internet. A lot of this information put out there is not correct. And I expect you to know the correct information. Okay. Now, coming from the 19th to the 20th century, European nations are empire building. Some of them have had empires for a long time, but some of them are brand new countries, like Germany, like Italy. They're brand new countries. They haven't had time to build empires. And so they're in a scramble. And that causes some problems. It causes scrambles because in the last part of the 19th century, what they're going to do is look at anything that's left that hasn't been grabbed yet and start doing it. They're going to divide up what's left of Africa and Asia with very few exceptions. What became Thailand wasn't colonized in Asia, and Ethiopia wasn't colonized in Africa. Other than that, they're all gone. The other thing that's happened that convinces people they know what's going on is that wars, there have been a lot of little wars, but they've been little. A few weeks, a few months, that's it. Those 3 wars that Bismarck used to unify Germany, small potatoes, didn't last long at all. And that's what the Europeans have become accustomed to. It doesn't so much matter if a war starts because it's going to be fought out on a battlefield. It'll be over quickly, and it won't really affect you. That's the way they see them. And that's not how this one's going to go. Now, how do you start a world war? Well, fairly straightforward. You take a place like the Balkans. Now, look at your map. Look at a map. Because look at Europe, Mediterranean, and then go down to the right-hand side of the Mediterranean and find Greece. Greece is a peninsula that cuts down into the Mediterranean. And then go up from there, and that area above Greece is the Balkans. And that's where this is all going to start. You probably don't pay much attention to that area of the map. Most people probably didn't then either. But it's the hot spot. Now, it starts really because the Balkans, that area, had been part of the Ottoman Empire for centuries. They were Europeans. They were predominantly Christian, but they were in that Turkish Ottoman Empire for centuries. And because they were Christian, they didn't get treated that well. So there was at first opportunity when the Ottoman Empire seemed to be falling apart, they went for their independence. And because of the situation, they pretty much got it. But they have another problem. All these little ethnic groups in the Balkans, and there were lots of them, Serbs, Croats, they all had nationalist fever. They all wanted their ethnic group, small as it was, to have a nation state. They wanted a country. like everybody else. But they're small, they don't have a lot of clout, and their populations are kind of tangled up, overlapping. You can't draw straight lines and say, here's one group, here's the other, it wasn't like that. So they've got a lot of problems with any hope of building a nation state. Okay. They've got another problem, a really big one. The Austro-Hungarian Empire. Austria had built this big empire, and the Hungarians were in it, and they'd gotten almost independence, not quite. So the Austrian Empire had become, in 1848, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. But it was still big, still powerful, and they wanted the Balkans. So these groups are very excited that they can be free of the Ottoman Empire, but the last thing they want is to be grabbed up by somebody else's empire. And that's about to be what happens to them. Now, the Austro-Hungarian Empire is led by an emperor. At the time, it was Franz Joseph. He had taken the throne, but way back in 1848. It is now 1914. He is old. He is near the end of his life. His son is dead, so his heir, the nearest relative he has, is a nephew, Franz Ferdinand. Everyone knows Franz Joseph hadn't got much time, and that soon Franz Ferdinand will be the new emperor. And then they did something rather foolish. They decided to make all those ethnic groups in the Balkans feel better. They would send Franz Ferdinand and his wife on a goodwill tour. Kind of, yes, you're probably going to be stuck in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but you'll like it. It'll be all right. They didn't. That was not how they felt, though. And then there's one ethnic group in the Balkans that really, really wanted to stay independent and be a nation state. And that was the Serbs. The Serbs, all of them felt this way, but there was this one organization called the Black Hand. Their symbol was a palm, just an outline of a palm. The palm was black against a white background. Black Hand. Okay. When they heard Franz Ferdinand and his wife are coming to their area, their city, Sarajevo. Sarajevo's still there. It's banged up, but it's still there. They decided to do something about it. So, Franz Ferdinand and his wife, in 1914, in the late summer, August, go to Sarajevo in the Balkans. And they went on a parade in an open convertible car, open car. The route for the parade was published in the newspapers. Everybody knew where to go stand and wait. And they started the parade. Not long into it, a member of the Black Hand jumped out of the crowd, out into the street, and fired a gun at them. He missed. So, these guys were committed, not that good though. He missed. They did not stop the parade. They continued. Same route, same speed. Keep going. Further down the track, another member of the Black Hand jumped out of the crowd and threw a bomb under the car. It did not go off. And so you're sitting there saying, okay, these guys really aren't very good, but they're serious. So they continued the parade. If you were in that car, you probably would have said, "Get me out of here," but anyway, they continued. And then a third assassin, a guy named Princeps, jumped out of the crowd and he jumped into the car. So he is right there. He shot both of them at point blank range. That absolutely worked. And so a Serbian has assassinated the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne. And he was going to be the emperor very quickly, so this is serious stuff. Austria wants payback. They want the Serbs to pay for this. They send them an ultimatum. Had several things on it that the Serbs were willing to do, but one thing, the last thing, they weren't. It was, "Welcome to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Your independence is gone. You're part of our empire now." Serbia said no. They wouldn't go there. They wouldn't do it. So Austria's going to send troops in there and pound them. Easy peasy, should be over fast. But that's not the situation they had. Serbs, that ethnic group in the Balkans, are Slavic people. They're in a ethnic category we call Slavic. They speak a Slavic language. The other people who are Slavic, well, some of the others who speak a Slavic language are the Russians. And so Russia, decades ago, had said that they were the protectors of all Slavic people. They still hold that true today. If you want to do anything to any Slavic people today, the Russians are going to say, not without our go-ahead. We protect all Slavic people. So, the other thing is Serbs are Orthodox Christians. So are Russians. And so the Russians protect other Orthodox Christians. So the Serbs are guaranteed Russian support. So Austria would like to go in after the Serbs. Sure. But if they do, they will have to deal with the Russians. Now, is that a problem? Well, what we know today is it wasn't really a problem because the Russian Empire was falling apart. They had failed to industrialize. They had failed to develop a middle class. They had failed to move forward. And so everybody thought of them as this big, killer empire. But they were quickly coming apart. As a matter of fact, the Russian Empire was only going to last another 3 years. But people outside didn't quite know that yet. So for Austria, this is scary. It's one thing to say, I'm going to take out this little group of Serbs, but it's another to fight the Russian Empire. They are big. So they're backing up. And then Germany comes in. I mean, Austria may have been excluded from the modern Germany, but they're still Germans. And the Kaiser, Emperor, whatever, Kaiser of Germany is Wilhelm II. His father was the one that created it with Bismarck, but now Junior's got it. And he has gone all over the globe causing trouble. He has started a lot of fights. And he thinks he's a lot smarter than he is. When he came to the throne, he fired Bismarck. "I don't need you, old man. I know what I'm doing." And he really didn't. And so we have Kaiser Wilhelm II sitting there. And he goes to the Austrians and says, "Don't back up. Don't hold off. Don't worry about the Russians. I'll handle the Russians. I'll take care of it. You go get the Serbs. I'll take care of this. But there's another problem. Russia, a few years back, had been worried that they hadn't modernized or industrialized or kind of made any friends, and they were looking for a friend. The French, after Bismarck and the Prussians beat them up to have a game, the French looked around for a friend. The British said, not us, don't call us. We're going it alone, we're happy that way. So the French and the Russians got together. The French felt Germany wasn't likely to come beat them up again if they had to worry about the Russians. And the Russians wanted the French to come in, build a few railroads, build a few factories, kind of get them started at an industrial revolution. So they each had something they wanted. They made a treaty, an alliance. So here's the thing. Any fight Russia gets into, France is into. Now look at your map. Look at Germany sitting right there, dead center of Europe. Okay? On one side is France, and on the other side, today, there's a bunch of countries there, and then Russia. But that wasn't what it looked like in 1914. Look in your book, on the maps in your chapter on World War I. None of those countries were there. It was France, Germany, Russia. All those countries like Poland and all that, that was all in Russia. So, if you're Germany in 1914, you're sitting there. On one side, France, on the other side, Russia, and if you fight one, they're both going to come at you. So is that a smart thing to do? Well, yeah, it is if you're Wilhelm II. He has a plan for dealing with this enemy on either side thing. One of the generals came up with it, a guy named von Schlieffen. It's called the von Schlieffen Plan. Okay? And here's the interesting thing. Germany used the same identical plan in both world wars. World War I and World War II. So, they thought they had a good plan. Anyway, here's the plan. Germany said, okay, Austria, you go hold off the Russians. You don't have to push into Russia. You don't have to beat them up or defeat them. Just hold them off for now, temporary. The Germans will go over and take out France. And the plan was simple. Take the city of Paris. Because everybody knew if you take Paris, France will fold like a cheap suit. Now find Paris on your map. It's right up there at the top, over toward Germany. So the German plan was Austria holds off the Russians, and then the Germans just cross over into France, take the city of Paris, France will surrender, and then they can take the whole German army back across and fight the Russians. So they won't be fighting two at the same time. It'll be hold off, take out one, then take out the other. Good plan. However, it didn't go that way. If you look at Berlin, say, up there at the top of Germany, and you look at Paris up there at the top of France, go over Paris, circle back. Now, there's a way to go straight from Germany to France without going through any other countries. But that's not what they did. The Germans tend to go on a straight line. So they go from Berlin straight across to Paris. But to do it that way, you've got to cross another country. It's just a little one. And I don't think they hesitated for a second or thought anything about it. Little bitty country sitting there, we got to go across it. Belgium. Look at Paris and then go over. There's Belgium, little country. It's neutral. It doesn't even have an army. It's like Switzerland, doesn't even have an army. Who's scared of Belgium? So Wilhelm II heads straight to Paris, and he crosses into Belgium. Why does anyone care? Well, here's why. When Belgium was created to be a neutral country with no army and no nothing, everybody in Europe agreed to leave it alone. But just in case someone didn't, the British signed a little treaty that said, if Belgium neutrality is violated, the British will protect Belgium. So, when the first Germans stepped across the border into Belgium, what happens? The British declared war on Germany. And with Germany, their ally, Austria too. They weren't expecting that. Wilhelm II had said, oh, that treaty the British signed about Belgium, they won't go to war over that. I don't think they would even notice he was wrong. So, we've got suddenly a new player. We've got the British. And the von Schlieffen Plan didn't provide for them. There was no plan for that. So what the Germans don't understand is this. When they march across from Belgium, and the Belgians did what they could, they didn't have an army, but they pulled up railroad tracks to try to slow down German trains. They did what they could. But when the Germans get across into France, it's not just going to be the French army as they had planned. It's going to be the French and the British army, and they hadn't planned for that. And the British and French forces are going to fight them to a standstill right across the border. In other words, all the years of this war, the Germans never make it to Paris. France never surrenders, which means they can't stop fighting in France and go fight the Russians. They've got to divide their forces and fight a war on each side, and you don't ever want to do that. A bad idea. Bad idea. But that's the situation. Plus, it's a lot worse than that. The British Empire at that point, 1914, controlled the seas. They had the biggest, most powerful navy in the world. They controlled the seas. And so, the minute they declared war, they threw up a blockade of the German coast, and they trapped almost all of the German Navy in port. They got stuck there, cut off. The British are going to spend the rest of the war guarding that coastline, and the German Navy can't get out. They're stuck. They hadn't planned for that either. So this makes it very different. War. Now, is this a world war? Well, in a way, it's going to become one, because as soon as the Japanese hear that the British, French, and Russians, the Allies, are at war with Germany and Austria, the Central Powers, as soon as they get that figured, I'm fixing to stop. As soon as they get that figured out, Japan will contact the British and say, you know that old alliance we had? We're coming in on your side. Now, the British know they're not going to come to Europe. They're not going to send ships. They're not going to send men. They're just going to stir up trouble in the Pacific. So they said, oh, no, don't need your help. Thanks a lot. But the Japanese declared war anyway. So did the Chinese. They declared on the Allied side. Every country in Latin America picked a side and declared war on one side or the other. Now, they didn't necessarily fight, but they figured, if I declare war, then at the end, and I'm on the winning side, I'll get something out of it. So it doesn't mean the fighting took place all over the world. It just means the whole world got their foot in it. Everybody except the United States. Americans weren't interested. Wanted no part of it. Today we kind of think of the British as our natural ally, but we didn't in 1914. We didn't like the British any more than we liked the Germans, any more than we liked the Russians. We didn't care. This isn't our fight. We don't know where the Balkans are, and we don't care. Leave us out of it. And so that's where we're going to start the war. I'm going to end this video. I want you to pay attention to this one, and then I'm going to add another one explaining how you fight a war like this. Okay? All right.